Good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome back to the Ask Abhijit show. Today, we are going to discuss history, Indian history, and world history. Welcome you all back to the show. Let us see before we start who all is there on the live stream, on the live chat. I can see real Vladimir Putin, geopolitical Dubai from Indore, Sumukh Bhupalam, Shaurya Rod, Udbhav Sharma, Victor Nitrode, Advait Ashwini. Good evening. Diva Dainikaini Viva. Okay. Dhruv Durya. Somi is here. Ritvik Bharadwaj. Mindwise. Lakshya Sharma. Lage Raho online. Good to see you, sir. Wise Idiot. Priyanshi Sood. Rakshit Mishra. Konichiwa. Sandy. PM5HU. Namaskar. Victor Knight Road once again. Somi is here from Jaipur. Lage Raho online once again. Geopolitical Dubai once again. Nirvana Shanks. Konichiwa. Konichiwa. Mac 4. Random Skull is here from Karnavati. Nice to see you. Balki today, namaste. Rajat Duhan, Sankalp Kumra, Ashish Chabda, Raja Akash Kumar. Good evening. Nutan Roshan, namaskaram. You Sir 01 Ram Ram. Abhishek 107, Anish 1784. Hello. Sandy once again. Vikash PJ, Om Nayak, namaskar. Priyanka Javalia, good evening, ma'am. Vikash PJ once again. Ritwij08. Hello. Good to have you. ANI Motion Clips. Jai Ho. Yo Sir Mac 4. Jagdish Mali. Hello. Alisha Behera. Hello. Gajapati Dev. Hello. Vikash PJ once again. Somi. Game of Thrones Breaking Bad. I'm not sure what that is. Yeah, I know. I've seen some of that. Wise Idiot once again, watching live after a long time. Well, good to have you. Welcome back. Brave Robot, Gaurav Dage. Yo Sir is here from Kerala. Good to have you from Kerala. Hello to Kerala, everybody there. Critical Thinker 24. Is it Saturday today? No, it's a Friday. I'm traveling on Sunday. That's why I'm doing it on Friday and Saturday this weekend. Rishikesh Das Gupta, Panduranga, Rolla, Real Vladimir Putin, Pratardana, Namaste, Super Rex, Trap Nation, Amisha Mishra, hello. Somi once again. Annie is here. Hello. Bala Subramaniam, good evening. Hari Banana Hegard is here from Dhanbad. Well, good to have you. Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, which would I choose? Season 1 to 4, Game of Thrones was outstanding. Breaking Bad overall was outstanding. Both are equally good. That's what I would say. Okay. Yo Sir, Advait Ashwini, Arka 6258, Geetan, Madala, Critical Thinking, and everybody else. Okay, let's get going with some questions. Okay, I will take as many questions as possible today, as always, in the next couple of hours. Let's see how many I can take. We're going to discuss various aspects of history, Indian history, world history, and it is that time of the year when we should perhaps begin with this question. Achintya Anand says, what were the reasons why the Vatican ordered the burning of documents related to the Spanish Inquisitions in India? And what kind of atrocities did these individuals commit that these documents needed to be burned? First of all, there wasn't a Spanish Inquisition in India. There was an Inquisition that's called the Goa Inquisition. So how did the Goa Inquisition begin? So the Portuguese were at the time, let's say in the 16th century, in occupation of Goa. They had captured parts of Goa, Western India, west coast of India, and they were occupying Goa, and they wanted to convert everybody to Christianity. They did not like India's indigenous culture and religions. So there was this fantastic gentleman whose name was Francis Xavier. You may have seen various schools in India named Saint Xavier's School, Saint Xavier's College, and so on. It's a very popular name in India for schools and colleges, Saint Xavier. So this individual, Francis Xavier, is who these Saint Xavier schools and colleges are named after. Okay, so this person, Francis Xavier, was a missionary. He was a Jesuit missionary. And he was in Goa in the 16th century. Okay, let's say middle of the 16th century, 1500s, 1550s, 1560, around that time. Okay, and this guy, maybe 1540s, he died in 1550 something. Okay, Francis Xavier. So before that, when he was in Goa, he wrote to the king of Portugal asking for an inquisition in Goa. Because the people of Goa, though some of them had been forcibly converted to Christianity, they were secretly practicing Hinduism. And they were secretly keeping idols, evil idols of Indian deities in their houses and secretly praying to them, that sort of thing. So something had to be done about these things. Something had to be done about these people, these evil Indians who would not convert properly to Christianity in Goa. So Francis Xavier wrote to the king of Portugal and he asked for a proper inquisition in India, in Goa. So the Goa Inquisition begins somewhere around 1560. Okay. So the Goa Inquisition was this brutal oppression of the people of occupied Goa. Anyone who was accused of being a heretic or being a crypto Hindu or being disrespectful to Christianity, etc., they would be brought to the court, the Inquisition court tribunal, and sometimes they would be imprisoned for years before they would actually the hearing would happen, and they would be tortured in the hearing. So first of all, they would not be told who had accused them of whatever. Secondly, they would be tortured in a variety of horrific ways. You know, the Europeans, the Catholics came up with all kinds of most horrific torture methods. I shall not go into the specifics and the details. You can look it up online. They had these instruments that would tear the breasts of women, and they had something called strappado. I'm just giving you 2 or 3 examples. Strappado or something. They would hang a person, from their wrists but behind the body, and then they would drop the person repeatedly so that the shoulders would get dislocated and the person would be in agonizing pain forever, essentially. There was something called what was it called? Yeah, there were, I forget the names. Okay, there are all kinds of horrific names of these various torture methods and instruments. There was the garrote, which was a method of execution. There was something called the auto da fe, that was public burning of people alive. Some people would have their hands cut off. There is this famous pillar in Goa, the Hath Katro Stambh, it's called, I believe, where I don't know how many thousands of people had their hands cut off. So all kinds of horrific, brutal methods of torture and oppression and murder. Okay, a murder sanctioned by the church. The objective was to ensure that Hindus did not reconvert or did not practice Hinduism in private. The objective was to intimidate and brutalize the people so badly that they would become devout Christians, that sort of thing. Okay, and they held God knows how many trials of people, and all of that was recorded. All of this was recorded. Okay, so this begins in the mid 16th century, 1560 or something onwards. And then after a century or two, by the early 1800s, after a century and a half of horrific oppression, destruction of temples, they re-engineered the Indian society. You know, historically, society, villages would have their own village institutions like panchayats or whatever. So the Portuguese imposed new rules that no decision could be made unless all the Christians who had converted to Christianity in the village were present in the assembly or meeting or whatever, and the head had to be Christian, and all kinds of such rules were made such that people had no choice but to eventually get, have to be forced to convert to Christianity. Temples were destroyed. Hindu priests were not allowed to officiate in weddings, and all kinds of atrocious rules. And of course, the torture and the executions of people, burning people alive, all of that. So this went on for a century and a half, roughly. And all the trials, all the proceedings were recorded in great detail by the Portuguese. Now, in the early 1800s, you have the rise of the Maratha Empire. By the time it becomes the dominant force, right? The Maratha Empire. In the 18th century, in the 1700s, 1750s, the Maratha Empire reaches the peak of its power, and eventually the Marathas go after. There is conflict between the Marathas and the Portuguese. So in the early 19th century, the Portuguese viceroy in Goa, he decided that the records, the documents, the archive of the Inquisition, all the proceedings, all the people who were tortured, all the people who were accused, all the people who were executed in various forms, various ways, etc. This archive, this documentation was politically dangerous. That's what the Portuguese viceroy decided. So he ordered the destruction of the overwhelming majority of the records of the Inquisition. So it was not ordered by the Vatican, it was ordered by the Portuguese viceroy in Goa. This happened in the early 19th century, okay, in the early 1800s. So, so what they did was they took some selected records, a few, I don't know what the quantity of the records was, and those records, the whatever they felt were the most important or whatever was worth preserving, they sent these records to the Portuguese court in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, and these apparently are still there in the National Library in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And the rest of the documentation, the rest of the archives, the rest of the documents were all burned, destroyed. We have no idea how much documentation was burned. From the documents that do exist, it looks like there were like some 15 to 20,000 trials were performed based on whatever has survived, and it says maybe 200 people were executed. That's what it says roughly. Okay, but the overwhelming majority of the records were destroyed, burned. So that is what happened. It wasn't the Spanish Inquisition, it was the Goa Inquisition conducted by the Portuguese. It wasn't the Vatican that ordered the burning or destruction of documents. It was the viceroy, the Portuguese viceroy of Goa in the early 19th century who decided this has to be done because it was too politically, etc., dangerous. It would show Portugal in a bad light. It would show Christianity in a bad light. All the nasty stuff, horrific atrocities they had done, all the records probably were meticulously listed and documented. All of that was destroyed. So these were human rights abuses. This was possibly genocide at a certain scale. Now, we don't know, right? We can only rely on perhaps the oral records of people who passed down the stories. Most of them eventually became so fervently Catholic that they denied anything. I mean, talking about the Goans, those who converted they eventually became so fervently Catholic that they denied anything had been done to their ancestors and so on. Over time, that gets into your blood, I suppose. So most of the evidence has been destroyed by the Portuguese, by the church, well, the records were in the custody of the church people, I suppose, of the Portuguese. So they destroyed it all to hide what they had done to Indians. So that today, if you try to look back upon that part of the history, we don't have any actual records of what the Portuguese did, apart from the little bit that is in the National Library in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So they destroyed the evidence. It's like the Nazis destroying evidence of the Holocaust, all the records of the Holocaust. That sort of thing the Portuguese did in India. So the atrocities they committed, we will never know, I suppose. The scale of the brutality, the scale of the atrocities, we'll never know. So this was done to cover up their tracks. It was done to cover up their atrocities, their human rights abuses, their genocide, their what they did. So it must have been horrific. It must have been so horrific that they decided it should not ever be made public, and that's why they burned it all. All right, so that was the deal about the Goa Inquisition, brought into India by Francis Xavier, this Jesuit missionary. Okay, Maths and CL says, what are the origins of the Ba'ath Party? The Ba'ath Party in the Arab world. Two very consequential leaders, Saddam Hussein and Hafiz al-Assad, were Baathists. Were they aligned in their goals and worldviews? The Ba'ath Party. So what is the Ba'ath Party? It is the party that Saddam Hussein belonged to. It is the party that Hafiz al-Assad belonged to. And as a consequence, Bashar al-Assad, his son, also belonged, well, you could say, to the Ba'ath Party. So how come? So first of all, we're talking about Iraq and Syria. Where is Iraq? Where is Syria? Let's find out. Let's go to the map and figure out which part of the world are we talking about. We're talking about West Asia, obviously. So let's focus on that part of the world. So if you're in India, go westwards, cross the temporary nation, cross Gandhar. We have Persia. You cross Persia, go further west. We come to Iraq and Syria. So we're talking about these two nations. The capital of Iraq is Baghdad, and the capital of Syria is Damascus or Damascus. Okay, these two nations we're talking about. So there was this political party that encompassed both these nations actually. How did that happen? Right? And how did the leaders of two nations belong to the same political party? It's a very good question, isn't it? The Baath Party. So, what's the story? What's the history of the Baath Party? The origins of the Baath Party go back to the 1940s. We're talking about a time when the world was at war, the Second World War. Okay, the 1940s we're talking about. And there were two Syrian intellectuals. One was a Christian. There are Christians apparently in Syria. So one was a Christian and one was a Muslim. You can look up their names. One was Michel something. There was Saladin something. Salah al-Din something. Two intellectuals, one Muslim, one Christian. They founded something called the Arab Renaissance movement in Syria, in Damascus. And the objective, the goal was to promote Arab nationalism. But what kind of Arab nationalism? Secular Arab nationalism. Okay, it starts with secularism. And it's not surprising given the way it eventually evolves. Because Saddam Hussein's Iraq was a secular nation, by the way. It was not an Islamic nation officially. It was a secular nation. So the origins are in Damascus in the 1940s. It is these two Syrian intellectuals who start this movement, the Arab Renaissance movement. The objective is to promote secular Arab nationalism. Okay, and this movement was formally established in 1947. I think that's a date all Indians can remember. It was established as the Resurrection Party. Now, how do you say resurrection in Arabic? You say Baath. So it became the Baath Party or the Resurrection Party. And they adopted a constitution based on various pillars like unity and freedom and socialism. Okay, socialism. So it was about Arab nationalism. It was about unity, freedom, socialism. It was about decolonizing the region because it was under, it had been under European control for a very long time, right? So that's what happened. And in the 1950s, the Baath Party, it merged with the Syrian Socialist Party. And it was eventually renamed as the Arab Socialist Baath Party. Okay, so that's in the 1950s, but it's still just a movement. It's not in power. Now, in 1963, in Syria, military officers of the Syrian military, of the Syrian army, who were aligned with the Baath Party, who belonged to the Baath Party, they conducted a coup d'etat in Syria, and they seized power in Syria. So the Baath Party in 1963 comes to power in Syria. And it's in the 1960s that Hafez al-Assad becomes a prominent leader, a prominent politician. And Hafez al-Assad, sometime in the 1960s, he engineers a split of the party, of the movement, into two camps, the Syrian camp and the Iraqi camp, or the Syrian branch and the Iraqi branch. And their ideologies and agendas start diverging in the 1960s. Then in 1968, the Iraqi branch of the Baath Party, it conducted a coup d'etat in Iraq, in Baghdad, and they took control of the government in Baghdad. And it was a person called al-Bakr who became the president of Iraq. He was the first Baathist president of Iraq. So eventually, Hafez al-Assad becomes the most prominent guy in Syria, to the east, to the west of Iraq, right? And in the 1970s, he becomes the most powerful person in the Baath Party in Syria. He assumes total control and total power, Hafez al-Assad. And the Western historians will tell you that he established a security state, a totalitarian security state. And, it was rooted in a cult of personality. It was rooted in personal loyalty to the man, Hafez al-Assad. And the core officers who were loyal to Hafez al-Assad were the Alawites, the Alawi. They belong to the minority Alawi sect of the Syrian population. Okay, so that's in the 1970s. Then there is transformation in Iraq as well. And in 1979, Saddam Hussein emerges and becomes the president of Iraq. He forces out the person who had who had become the first president, Mr. Al-Bakr. He forces him out, and he becomes the president of Iraq. And then, in a very famous televised uh, conference or something, a meeting in a very large hall, he publicly purged all his rivals in the Baath party to completely and totally consolidate power within his person. So there's a recording. There are multiple recordings of this available on YouTube. Okay, it's a black and white recording in which Saddam Hussein is sitting on the stage, and he's got these papers with him. He's smoking a cigar, and he's reading out names one by one. He says that if I read your name out, there's a huge audience in front of him. He says that if I read your name out, stand up, recite the party slogan, and go outside of the hall where you will be taken care of, let's say. And that becomes, I mean, killing. Name after name comes up. The person has to stand up. Some people protest. They are escorted out. They're pulled out. And one can imagine what happened to those people whose names were spoken by Saddam Hussein, called out by Saddam Hussein. So Saddam Hussein becomes the all-powerful leader of Iraq, right? So that is what happened. Then in the 70s, late 70s, there were some attempts to unify the Syrian and Iraqi states, but you see, when you have two strong leaders, there's gonna be ego clashes, there's gonna be rivalry. So you have Saddam Hussein in Iraq, you have Hafiz al-Assad in Syria. They would not get along, right? And then the two nations become rivals. They become rivals to such an extent that when there was a war between Iraq and Iran, which is from 1980 to 1988, the Iran-Iraq war. At that time, Syria sided with Iran, not with Iraq, despite both nations being ruled by the Baath party, right? So Syria took the side of Iran when Iran was at war with Iraq, despite Syria being ruled by the Baath party, by the Syrian Baathist party, and Iraq being ruled by the Iraqi Baath party. So clearly, the two nations were not aligned. The two leaders were not aligned. They were on opposite ends of the, they were essentially rivals. And that caused rivalry between the two nations themselves. And that essentially is the story of the Baath party. And eventually, now, Hafiz al-Assad gave, he once he passed away, the power was taken by his son. The mantle or the baton or the crown, let's say, passed on to his son, Bashar al-Assad, who was ousted recently this year by al-Farah, who is a former terrorist, formerly wanted terrorist, ISIS terrorist, that sort of thing. Yeah, so regime change operation has happened successfully, and the Baath party is no longer in power in Syria. And when it comes to Iraq, it was the Baath party was ousted in 2003, was it, when the Americans invaded Iraq for the second time and obliterated the nation. So that was the story of the Baath party. The Baath party's origins are in Syria. A Muslim and a Christian came together to start this movement that eventually became the Baath party. With two very consequential leaders, Saddam Hussein and Hafiz al-Assad, were both Baathists, but they were not aligned in any way in their goals, and they were actually rivals. And the Syrian Baath party lasted longer than the Iraqi Baath party, and both were ended by a foreign power, the same foreign power, the United States. That's the story of the Baath party. Amisha says, how was the Kingdom of Spain able to colonize such vast swaths of Central and South America without other nations competing? Well, you see, in business, there is something called first mover's advantage. If you come up with a technology for the first time, if you're the first to come up with the technology, then you're going to have an advantage. And you're going to move into the market first, right? And that's what happens. So Spain, what happens is, let's look at the chronology. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, he is given this big charter, or whatever you want to call it, by the King and Queen of Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand. They give him money, they give him ships, etc. And the objective is, Christopher Columbus promises them, I'm going to go and discover India, and I'm going to colonize India, and I'm going to bring back all the wealth and make you super fabulously rich. That was the deal. So they gave him what he wants, and he goes and crosses the Atlantic. He goes westwards instead of going eastwards, because if you go eastwards, you have to cross the Turkish occupied territories, and that was a problem. They could not do that. So they knew how to reach India from the east, but that route was cut off by the Ottoman Turks. So they had Christopher Columbus at the time knew that the Earth is round, it's spherical. It was newly discovered by the Europeans at the time, a few thousand years too late, but whatever. So Christopher Columbus goes westwards, and he stumbles into the Caribbean region, and he imagines that he has discovered India. So in 1492, Christopher Columbus discovers, let's say, America. He very rapidly colonizes Hispaniola, Cuba, and the surrounding region. Then the Portuguese also are very capable. Okay, they at the time had a very capable navy, etc. So they also said, why should we get left out? But then they had a good relationship, or working relationship, with the kingdom of Castilla, which is Spain. So the Spanish and the Portuguese, they decided to carve up the world, divide the world among each other in such a way that they would not have to compete and fight. That was the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494. Yeah, you can look it up. And they divided the world along a north-south meridian, that sort of thing. The western part of this would be taken over by the Spanish, and the eastern part would be taken over by the Portuguese. They would be free to colonize all non-Christian nations in the eastern half, and the Spanish would be free to colonize all non-Christian nations or cultures in the western half. So it was all about colonization. It was all about occupation, plunder, slavery, and conversion to Christianity. Okay, so, and at this time, it's only Spain and Portugal that are the big guys. Okay, they had the technological know-how, the capabilities to do these things. They had the navy. They had the navies that could do this. Their navies were better than any other European navies, and they had the money that was coming in from the crown. And that's how the Spaniards went ahead and colonized first the Aztec Triple Alliance, and then the Inca Empire. Brutal stuff, as we know, as we have discussed many times in the past. And the Portuguese went eastwards. They colonized various parts of Africa. They came to India. They tried doing their thing over here in India, and they brutalized Goa, and that sort of thing, right? So Spain had the first mover advantage in Central and South America. Now, by the 1550s, other nations were like, why should we get left behind? So the French start, attempting to put down a toehold somewhere in the Americas, and they try and fail several times. Eventually, they end up in the northern half of North America, the Quebec, Canada region, right? And that's a whole different story. That's much later. And the English also. The English at the time did not have a powerful navy. So they also were interested in the Americas. They also were interested in colonizing the whole world, right? And in the 1500s, these efforts of England were subsidized by the crown. Who was the crown? It was Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. So what she did was she financed various piracy operations. These pirates were called privateers, and they would engage in piracy, in murder, in slavery, all financed by the British Crown. But it's only in the early 1600s that the British came up with a different way of doing things. The various British private citizens, wealthy private citizens, merchants, they formed joint stock companies, and that was the means by which they financed the East India Company and various colonization efforts, even in the Americas. So that's how everything changes. And we're talking about the 1600s here. That's when we have Jamestown and all, Plymouth and all that. So for a century or so, the Spaniards and the Portuguese were able to divide the world into two halves. And because of first mover advantage, they were able to do a lot. And the Spaniards became very wealthy as a consequence, because of the conquest of the Aztec Triple Alliance Empire and the Inca Empire, which were very populous, very wealthy. They were able to, have as many slaves as they wanted. Tremendous quantities of gold flowed into Spain, which was able to finance further Spanish activities and wars and military operations and whatnot. But eventually, the British model proved to be superior. So that's why the Spaniards, because of first mover advantage, were able to colonize vast regions of Spain, of Central and South America. Amisha says Britain, Spain, and Portugal had three of the biggest empires back in the day. However, why do Spain and Portugal have very little power or influence on the world stage today, unlike Britain in present day politics? Well, even Britain has zero advantage today, zero influence, zero power. But the continuation of the British Empire, which is the American Empire, is the all powerful entity in the world today. So you could say that the British Empire still is the predominant hegemonic entity in the world in the shape and form of the American Empire. It has morphed into something different, but it's a continuation of the same entity. Okay. So, yeah, you could say that the Anglo Empire continues and still predominates. It is the hegemonic empire in the world today. But Spain and Portugal, well, they don't matter anymore. They are completely marginalized. They simply don't matter geopolitically today. Why is that so? Well, ask yourself this question. In the 18th century, the Maratha Empire was all powerful in India, in the Indian subcontinent. What happened to it? It doesn't even exist anymore. Similarly, the Spanish Empire doesn't exist anymore. The Portuguese Empire doesn't exist anymore. They still, the Spaniards still have their royal family, the crown, so on. It's just a nominal thing. It's a tradition that they are holding on to. In India, we have destroyed those traditions of the royal families, because the royal families were wiped out, most of them, the real ones, in 1857. So the Maratha Empire was so powerful in the entire subcontinent. What happened to it? No power, no influence, no existence today. The Roman Empire was all powerful across the Mediterranean region, across Europe, across North Africa, even parts of West Asia. What happened to it? Gone, right? Look at Italy today. What power, what influence does Italy have today? I'm not trying to make fun of the nation. I'm just giving this example. Okay? The Vikings were super powerful in Western Europe. There was a Viking age, roughly 200 years. What happened? Where's the Vikings today? Sweden, Denmark, Norway. What about these three nations? What power, influence do they have? None. So the answer is that empires rise and fall. Empires rise, empires become powerful, then they decline and they fall. These are cyclical aspects of history. So the Spanish Empire, the Spanish power came, grew, and went. Their policies weren't great. They weren't able to eventually compete with the Anglos, with the English. The same can be said about Portugal and everybody else. So that's why today it's only the Anglo-Saxon Empire that has the hegemony, essentially global power projection capabilities, because they got everything right. Their system of financing their operations and expeditions and their, expeditions of plunder and conquest, they were financed properly. They were great at logistics. They were great at playing the game of divide and rule, divide and conquer, and then rule. They were great at securing trade routes. They were great at securing choke points, geographical choke points. The Spanish and the Portuguese weren't great at this. The Portuguese had this policy, you could say, of just holding on to toeholds of land, footholds of having small footholds of land, on the margins of the trade routes and choke points, like Malacca. The Portuguese had Malacca. The Portuguese had Goa. They had Vasai in Western India. And so on. So they did not ever expand inwards into the land, into the territory of the subcontinent or other parts of the world. The British said, we're gonna create our own kingdoms. We're gonna actually govern land. The Portuguese didn't want to govern anything. They just wanted to trade and plunder. So the Spanish obviously did what the British did, but they were not as efficacious, whatever, as the British. So that's why the British eventually prevailed, and that's why Spain and Portugal are essentially, well, to be very realistic, non-entities geopolitically today. Amisha once again says, why did the Portuguese colonies in South America evolve into a single country, which is Brazil, whereas the continent's Spanish colonies broke off into nearly a dozen nations? Interesting question. Let's take a look at the map and see the situation in South America with our own eyes to confirm what Amisha is claiming. So here we have one gigantic nation, Portuguese speaking nation, which is Brazil. And then you have all these Spanish speaking nations like Argentina, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela. And then you have Guyana. We'll not talk about Guyana here. Uruguay, we forgot Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia. So all these Spanish speaking nations and just one Portuguese speaking nation. What happened? How did this happen? Why did the Portuguese colonies evolve into a single nation, single modern day nation, Brazil? But the the Spanish colonies all gave rise to multiple nations that actually weren't on very good terms with each other. How did that happen? Is the question. So I spoke about the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494. The Spanish and the Portuguese divided the world into two halves. Okay, and it was along a line. See, let's take a look at. Let's Google this so that I can put this on the screen for easy comprehension. Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494. Look at the images. So if you see, okay, let's see this. As you can see on the screen, they divided the world into two halves, and the line on the left, as you can see, it kind of gives Portugal, the blue territory, it gives Portugal what is now Brazil, less than what is Brazil today, but the Portuguese were given the right to occupy and colonize that part of the Americas, okay, because of the line that was drawn on the map. So the Portuguese go ahead and create this colony. And what the Portuguese do is they create a single viceroy for the entire region. But what the Spanish did is that they created multiple territories that were self-governing. You had New Spain, you had whatever else the other ones were called. You had what was Peru and the Inca Empire region and so on. So the Spanish created essentially autonomous, quasi-independent, self-governing territories that would all report back to Spain, but they would not. But they were all autonomous in a way from each other. Okay, so that's how the Spanish organized the territories they had occupied in the Americas. The Portuguese put everything under one single viceroy. For the Spanish, there are multiple viceroys, and these Spanish colonies became kind of competitive with each other also. So there was a safeguarding of territory, and there was a bit of friction and hostility and that sort of thing between the different Spanish territories. Even though they were all Spanish territories, they all reported back to the crown in Spain. But in the case of Brazil, it was not the case. Everything was under a single viceroy. Then you have, so we're talking about what? The aftermath of 1492, 1494. We're talking about the 1500s, the 1600s, and so on. Even the 1700s. So the situation evolves in this manner. Okay, then what happens is in Europe, something incredible happens. You have the rise of this one person called Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, in 19 years, he went to from being an absolutely obscure nobody to being the emperor of France and king of Italy in just 19 years. That's Napoleon. Incredible feat. And he would do over one weekend what most people would do in their lifetime. That sort of thing. Reorganizing the entire governance system of, let's say, a country, and writing a new constitution, putting new laws, new governance, that sort of thing. And Napoleon was very ambitious. And there was this period of time which is called the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. And he invaded Spain as part of the Napoleonic Wars. We're talking about the early 1800s. 1805 to 1815. Or is it 1803 to 1815? Let's quickly take a look. Napoleonic Wars. When was this? 1803 to 1815. Okay, I was almost correct. Yeah, you don't have to memorize dates. You can always look them up. So, the Napoleonic Wars is when Napoleon tried to conquer the entire world, starting with Europe, and he invaded Spain. As a result of this, the Spanish colonies in the Americas were kind of cut adrift from the crown in Spain, and they became kind of independent. And that is the genesis of the independent nations, all Spanish speaking nations in the Americas. So the governors they were no longer connected to Spain. Spain was in complete disarray. Napoleon was invading, right? And this completely changed the structure and governance and so on of Spain. So these colonies became essentially independent, and they became nation states eventually in their own right. And some of them went to war with each other. That happens. That is known to happen in in Latin America. Two nations may sometimes go to war over a football match, even though they are both Spanish speaking. That sort of thing. But Brazil did not happen. Uh, so Brazil becomes independent of Portugal. What, in the 1820s? When was it? Let's fact check. What was the actual year? Let's find out. Brazil independence year. It's 1822. So Brazil becomes independent. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not put that on the screen. So Brazil becomes independent from Spain, from Portugal, on the 7th of September 1822. Brazil becomes independent. And then in Brazil also, it was not all smooth sailing. There were parts of Brazil, especially northern or whatever, that wanted to secede, that wanted to be independent. And the Brazilian government had to use military force for a couple of decades to quell these rebellions and these quests for independence. So it was not all smooth sailing. But yeah, Brazil eventually was able to prevail. And that's how they were able to remain united as a single nation, Brazil, whereas the other continental Spanish colonies broke off into a bunch of other countries. And the way they broke off into various countries depends obviously on the geography of the continent. You have the Andes Mountains, which obviously separates Peru and Chile from the rest, from the eastern part of the continent, and so on. Okay, Bill Bradley says, what does Bill Bradley say? Genghis Khan, the great Mongol conqueror, ended enough lives to leave a mark in the carbon record. He was one of the most prolific takers of life ever seen. This is the worst academic channel on YouTube. Okay, so I have in the past said that Genghis wasn't that bad and so on. So this gentleman, Bill Bradley, says that I am one of the worst academic channels on YouTube, and Genghis Khan killed so many people that it left a mark in the carbon record. Let us find out whether I am completely wrong and I'm completely biased and this is the worst academic channel on YouTube. Let's find out. Let's fact check this, okay? Okay. Genghis Khan carbon record, global cooling. So it is said that he caused global cooling, right? So there is this website, Mongabe. Okay, what is this IFL science? Let's take a look at this. Okay, it says that Genghis Khan killed enough people to cool the planet, and this is by whoever. A gentleman called Benjamin Taub, who holds a master's degree in anthropology from University College London, and he has worked in neuroscience and mental health. Okay, so this gentleman has a master's degree in anthropology from University College London. So he says that scientists have identified a certain decrease in atmospheric carbon of about 3 parts per million. 3 parts per million, remember that, between 1200 and 1470 CE, which correlates with the Mongol invasion of Asia and so on. This may account for changes in carbon dioxide levels and allowed more trees to grow and act as carbon sinks and so on. Despite so okay, so that's what he says. So he says that Genghis Khan killed enough people to cool the planet. That is his claim, and he has said that this sequestered huge amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, possibly even cooling the planet. So that is what our friend, what's his name, Benjamin Taub says. And there is this Mongabe, whatever that is, which also makes the same claim. And how Genghis Khan cooled the planet, altered life sciences, Mongol invasion, altered carbon dioxide levels, and so on. So this is a very commonly believed thing. Why Genghis Khan was good for the planet. That's what the Guardian of the UK is saying, and so on. Now let's take a look at some actual research papers. Yes. So let's take a look at this one here. Okay, this is from the astrophysics data system. This is actually something that is more connected to, well, my field, but it also has this paper about carbon emissions. So Holocene carbon emissions is a result of anthropogenic land cover change. And the DOI is, the last 6 numbers are 386983. 386983. 386983. Now let me put the actual PDF on the screen. Okay, here, let's open it. Let's fact check this properly. Okay, once again, it's the same DOI 386983, same paper. Yeah. So, and this is by Kaplan, Krumhart, Ellis, Ridiman, etc., etc., etc. These are the authors. Holocene carbon emissions as a result of anthropogenic land cover change. So here we have a graph, a chart. Let's bigify it, embiggen, enlarge it. So on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration and also human population in millions. And on the horizontal axis, we have years before present. So this ends at 1850. Okay, it starts at 6,000 years before present. So if we look at the time period of 2000 years before present, that is, when the AD-BC shift happens. And we're talking about 1200 to 1400 AD, right? So it's around this time period, 1000 to 750. And you can see that there is, there are two graphs here, two lines. The top one is the human population, and on the bottom, the second lower one, that is the carbon dioxide levels in parts per million, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration in parts per million. And as you can see, between 1000 years before present and 750 years before present, or even 500 years before present, there's no major change in the atmospheric carbon levels. Whatever change happens, it's just very minor, very gradual, right? So Genghis Khan was born when? 1170 or something, and he died in 1227. So around that time, what do you see? And afterwards, also the Mongol Empire was a very big deal for the next century or so. You see no such thing here. You don't see any major change in the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. So that kind of raises a question mark about what these people have been claiming. Now let's take a look at a different research paper. And it's verifying that we are human here. We are all humans. Yes, I would confirm that. Coupled climate carbon simulations indicate minor global effects of wars and epidemics on atmospheric carbon dioxide between between 800 AD and 1850. So let us put the PDF of this research paper on the screen. It's by Julia Pongratz et al. Julia Pongratz et al. Same paper. Okay, now let's take a look at what this paper claims. Let's embiggen it. So it says, okay, only the Mongol invasion could have lowered global carbon dioxide, but by an amount too small to be resolved by ice cores. So they're talking about the reduction of global carbon dioxide levels. They say that the Mongol invasion only could have lowered it, but it would have been by an amount that is too small to be resolved by ice cores. Now let's go down and let's take a look at whatever the paper is all about. Let's take a look at some details. So it's talking about global carbon dioxide decreases. This global decrease in carbon dioxide caused by the Mongol invasion is still smaller than 0.1 parts per million, and therefore not detectable in ice core records with a typical measurement precision of 1 part per million. Okay. Now let's ask. So clearly the claims don't hold up. Now let's ask Google to fact check. Okay, please fact check. Genghis Khan ended enough lives to leave a mark on the carbon record. Please fact check. What's it say? What does the Google AI say? It says nothing. So as you can see, okay, how about I try a different version of Google. Let's try a different version of Google. Give me a second, please. Let's try a different version, one where I'm logged in. Now, let's say what happens now. I'm going to ask it to fact check. Okay, it's once again not the Google AI isn't. Where is the AI? Okay, let's go to AI mode. Please fact check this. What does the Google AI say? This claim is based on the 2011 study from Carnegie, blah blah blah, which key findings from the research include blah 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 blah. Okay, where does it come from? It's giving me social media stuff. Please find the link to the study. Okay, please come on, bro. Let's do it. Does it have a link? Julia Pong. Okay, we just opened that document, the study by Julia Pongratz et al. Right? So, according to that research paper, one second, let me just copy paste this. Okay. The research paper says, and I quote, in quotes, right, is still smaller. So, does the claim that Genghis ended? So, yeah. So, does the claim still hold up? One second. What does this say? Right. Okay. So where was there any measured? So is there any evidence? Okay. Is there any actual empirical evidence of decrease in CO2 levels due to the Mongol invasion? Please answer in one word. Let's see what it says. Thinking. No empirical evidence suggests a decrease in carbon dioxide levels due to the Mongol invasion. I could go into this in great detail, but I think I just debunked this claim, this malicious claim that Genghis Khan killed so many people that there was a global decrease in carbon dioxide levels and global cooling. I just debunked this right in front of you. This is how narratives are built. The research paper clearly says there is no measurable decrease, and whatever decrease we are imagining is inferred or imagined or whatever. There is no hard evidence of any measurable decrease in global carbon dioxide to levels from that time period. I just debunked this live for you all. So this is how people create narratives. This is how the West creates narratives about the East. That is how they have managed to globally demonize Genghis Khan. Okay? I just debunked this live in front of you. You can please feel free to go deeper into this. You will find zero evidence, no evidence whatsoever, no hard scientific evidence whatsoever from ice cores or whatever other means you want to look into. There's no evidence whatsoever that there was any decrease in global carbon dioxide levels or there was any global cooling whatsoever because of any Mongol invasion. There you have it. All right. Victor Knightrood says, was the Mongol Empire destructive or was it a cause or a catalyst of globalization? Look, an empire that expands is going to cause destruction. I mean, look at world history. You can't say that you can't expect one empire to somehow be non-destructive. The Mongol Empire, it expanded for a variety of reasons. It starts with Genghis Khan. It starts with the Shah of Khwarazm and his treatment of Mongol diplomats and merchants. Horrible treatment. So that had to be dealt with. Before that, it was all about China and China's brutal treatment of Mongolia for centuries. That's how the entire expansion started. Okay, so the Mongol Empire became a very large empire. It essentially, you could say that Genghis Khan possessed half of the known world of his time. And after his death, the Mongol Empire expanded even further because of the conquests of his sons and grandsons and so on. His grandson Hulegu ended the golden age of Islam, for example, by flattening Baghdad. So the Mongol Empire, obviously, it expanded through military conquest. It caused destruction. It may have caused the deaths of potentially millions of people. But if you calculate the number of deaths per square kilometer, I would say Timur will go higher. The Romans will go higher. Alexander will go higher. The British Empire will go higher. In the metric that I'm talking about, which is number of deaths per square kilometer, Genghis Khan will be lower than them all. I don't have the numbers right now. I could actually do this. I'll not do it live because it will take half an hour at least to get the data and stuff. But I can guarantee that the number of lives, how many lives are attributed to Genghis Khan? Whatever the number is, it's going to be lower than Timur or the Turkic invasions of India and so much more. So let's not go into that. Now, what about the Mongol Empire being a cause or a catalyst of globalization? So the Mongol Empire unified essentially half of Eurasia, roughly half of Eurasia, which is parts of Europe and much of Asia, excluding the Indian subcontinent. Genghis Khan decided he will not invade India because he had no reason to. And I've gone into that in my first video in detail. So the Mongol Empire, it created a unified Eurasian zone. Okay. And the Mongols were very much in favor of having trade across the entire Mongol Empire. So they established what they called caravanserais, trade caravanserais. They established relay stations. They gave diplomats and other people passports. They standardized weights and measures across their entire kingdom. And they ensured that there are relatively predictable taxes across the entire empire. So suddenly the entire empire, this huge part of Eurasia, becomes open. There are no more boundaries and borders and all. You could just go in if you were a citizen of the Mongol Empire, you could travel anywhere as long as you had a valid business. So it created a huge, essentially, free trade zone with very clear, predictable rules and all the infrastructure you needed to travel and to do trade. And this had the effect of stimulating and catalyzing cross-cultural exchanges, because you had so many, this caused the creation of this huge infrastructure, trade infrastructure, caused the movement. It facilitated the movement of scholars, of craftsmen, of artisans, of religious figures, of technicians, of scientists, engineers, writers, poets, singers, whatever, all kinds of people across Eurasia. So this catalyzed cross-cultural exchanges. So it created a huge free trade zone. It catalyzed cross-cultural exchanges across the entire empire. And it linked the economy of China with Central Asia, with the Islamic world, and with even parts of the Eurasian, or with the parts of the various European economies. All because everything was protected by the Khan, the great Khan. So clearly this is one of the first examples of globalization, proper globalization, under a clear and predictable system of rules. A rules-based world order, wasn't it? So yeah, it was indeed a catalyst of globalization, right? Okay. Nirvana Shanks says, Nirvana Shanks has asked a lot of questions, but you asked at the very end, just a couple of hours before the live stream. So I was able to take only one, but maybe I'll take some more of your questions in the next episode. So the question here is this: how did Chancellor Bismarck unify Germany? And what were the major consequences for the European balance of power? Right, Germany. So Germany is, historically, the past century or so, it's been the engine that drives the European economy. It's the most historically we know it's been, you could say, the most powerful nation in Europe until 1945, you could say, right? But Germany as a nation, it it was born in 1871. Before that, there was never something called Germany. The Romans spoke about various Germanic tribes, the Swabi and the whatever the names of the tribes were. And there was never a unified German nation. There were various Germanic speaking, well, states, you could say, duchies and so on, principalities and so on, but it was never one unified nation called Germany. So Bismarck, so there was something called Prussia. Prussia was this major, you could say, German-speaking principality in what is now Germany. So Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, was Prussian, and he was appointed in the 1860s as the minister president of Prussia. Okay, if you want to see where is Prussia, what used to be Prussia, let's first take a look at that. What was Prussia? Prussia. So let's go to images, and this was Prussia essentially. Okay, the green part, which is obviously kind of part of much of Germany today, that was Prussia. Here's another example of Prussia. This is from 1867 to 1871, before the war. So we will talk about that now. So that was Prussia, and Otto von Bismarck became the minister president of Prussia in the 1860s. And he said that we're going to unify the land through blood and iron, through strategy and realpolitik. So then he engineered 3 wars of unification. Okay, the first war was the Danish War. He went to war with what Bismarck did is that he allied with Austria. He allied with Austria and fought Denmark and defeated Denmark, and they took the then Danish territories of Schleswig and Holstein, and that became part of their territory. And then he went to war with Austria, with whom he had allied against Denmark. So first in the 1860s, there's a war with Denmark, which Prussia and Austria win. Then Prussia goes to war against Austria. He found some pretext, some excuse to go to war with Austria. He allied himself with Italy. He ensured that the French and the Russians remain neutral. And then he went to war with Austria and defeated Austria. And then he marginalized Austria. He essentially excluded Austria from German affairs altogether. And the old confederation and old alliance was invalidated or dissolved. So he defeats Austria. And then there's the pivotal war, 1870, 1871, the Franco-Prussian War. So now that Austria is dealt with, right, he now goes to war. He goads France into declaring war against Prussia. And then he says that we are facing an existential threat. France is going to defeat us all. So he rallies all the other southern German principalities into an alliance with Prussia to defeat the French. And they're able to defeat the French. And there is a very harsh treaty that is imposed on the French. And the French territory, Alsace and Lorraine, is taken into Germany, is annexed into Germany. And by doing this, he was able to consolidate and create a unified Germany through these 3 wars. First with Denmark, then with Austria, then with the French. And that's how he was able to, create this common cause for all the German principalities, that we have to come together, unify and unite. Otherwise, we'll be taken apart. And that's how he was able to create a unified Germany. So 1871 is the creation of the German Empire. Prussia under Bismarck brought all the southern principalities and states and duchies into a new federal structure, which was dominated by Berlin. Okay, and then they proclaimed Wilhelm I as the German Empire in Versailles, in France. It was in 1871, and the entire thing was structured in such a way that Prussia was essentially in control of various aspects of administration and the major power in what was now Germany. especially power over the army, military policy, foreign policy, economic policy, all of that. So the unification of Germany was a triumph of Bismarck. It was a triumph of Prussian power, and it was a triumph of German nationalism. So, how did this? What kind of consequences did this have on Europe? Is the question that Nirvana Shanks is asking. What were the consequences for Europe? So, you suddenly have in 1871 the creation of a new German empire, a new nation of Germany, and a German empire. This new nation, it has a large population, it has advanced industry, it has a tremendously excellent education system. It has this laser focus on technology and science. I mean, quantum mechanics comes out of Germany, right? Doesn't it? And they had, because they had an advanced industry, high quality industry, because of that they also had a first rate military. And Germany essentially almost overnight became the leading terrestrial or land power in Europe, and it became a major industrial economy and a major and the leader in science and technology and engineering and everything else in Germany. And because of this excellent education system, it eventually gave the world tremendously gifted physicists who changed the way we understand the world. Okay, and Austria was permanently excluded from German politics. It was marginalized, and it was relegated to a regional role within a dual monarchy, which is Austria-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Right? It weakened Austria significantly. France lost Alsace-Lorraine. France was humiliated. It lost prestige, and this obviously gave rise to this desire for revenge within the people of France. And this became, you could say, a long-term, persistent source of enmity with this new nation of Germany. And the unification of this new nation, Germany, it forced various other powers like Russia and everybody else to look towards creating their own alliances, because the rise of this strong, confident, very powerful new Germany, it obviously led to the intensification of arms races and rivalries with obviously France, with Russia, with Italy and Austro-Hungary, and so much more. So you had tension, and eventually, obviously, Britain. Yeah, Britain also was, as you know, it was the British Raj, the days of the British Raj. So the creation of this new nation, it obviously would be seen as worrisome from England. And all these factors, all these simmering rivalries and hostilities, they became the melting pot, and you could say the key factors that eventually pushed Europe towards what would be called the First World War. So yeah, it set in motion a series of events that gave rise to the First World War. So the period between 1871 and 1914, you could say, was a period of Cold War where everybody was looking for an advantage, and everyone was looking for the day we can go back to war and settle old scores. So that was the deal. Chancellor Bismarck unifying Germany, and eventually all culminated in the First World War, which did not end satisfactorily for Germany, which gave rise to the Second World War. And the rest we understand. Shub says, explain the origins of the Romans that built the Roman Empire. Were the European in the modern sense perfectly white skin? I'm not sure if Europeans have perfectly white skin, but some Europeans, I suppose you could say, have very white skin. Okay, so what's the origins of the Roman people who founded the Roman Empire? First of all, let's look at the map to understand what part of the world are we talking about. The Roman Empire emerged from Italy. So it's in the Mediterranean region, southern Europe. Italy is this place. And the region around the city of Rome is where you had this Latin-speaking group of people who became the founders, you could say, of Rome. And there are mythological factors in this, and there's legends associated with this. The legend of Remus and Romulus. It is also said that Rome was founded by Greeks who fled from the Trojan War, and so on. So north of the region of present-day Rome, you had another ethnic group that lived there. They were called the Etruscans. And in the south, you had the ethnic Greeks who lived in the southern parts of Italy, which was, you could say, you know, greater Greece region kind of thing. So the people who eventually became, who founded Rome as a republic, they lived in the region around Rome, and then they intermarried with the Etruscans and with the ethnic Greeks who lived in southern Rome, and it became kind of a mixed population. What was the ethnicity? It was a southern European ethnicity, which means light brown skin, not exactly white skin. Yeah, and eventually, as we know, Rome became an empire, and they conquered the Celtic parts of Europe, which is Gaul, which is today's France and Switzerland. They conquered the Iberian part of Europe, which is present day Spain. The Spanish people also don't really have white skin. They conquered North Africa, where the people cannot really be called white people. They obviously aren't white. They aren't really black. They're kind of brown, light brown. Uh, they conquered present day Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, Thrace, Greece, and so on. They conquered Anatolia, which is present day mostly Turkey. They conquered West Asia also, and Egypt also, and Northern Africa, Libya, and so on. And the people of this entire huge region, most of them, yeah, they were then regarded as Roman citizens, and they were free to move around the empire. And then the people intermixed and intermingled. So so what did the Roman people look like? The core Roman people, they would have had kind of light brown skin. They would not be white. They would have dark hair and dark eyes mostly. Eventually, if you look at Italy today, if you look at Italian people today, many of them have blonde hair and blue eyes. I mean, Madame Meloni, Giorgia Meloni, has blonde hair and blue eyes. So her ancestry probably lies north of Italy. Yeah, because there was intermixing of populations. And you know what's interesting is that the Romans had emperors who were of North African origin, Arabic origin, Syrian origin. Septimus Severus was of Libyan or Punic origin. He can be called the first Roman emperor who was of African origin. There was another one called Macrinus, whatever. These are all in the. Macrinus was from the 3rd century AD. Septimus Severus was from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Then there was an emperor called Philip the Arab, who was of Syrian descent. His family was from present-day Syria. And then you also had an emperor called Elagabalus, probably the worst Roman emperor of all time, who also was of Syrian origin. So eventually the Romans became a very cosmopolitan, homogeneous kind of population. But the original Romans were Southern Europeans, which means that they would have light brown skin, dark hair, and brown eyes mostly. Okay. Next question is by Amisha. Why did the Roman Empire persecute early Christians when they were mostly content, the Romans, they were mostly content to let the Jewish people practice their faith with relatively little interference? You are right. The Romans ruled over Judea, which is present-day Israel, Greater Israel or whatever region, West Asia. Most people there practiced Judaism. And the Romans, they had no issue with Judaism. They did not interfere with the Jewish activities, religious activities. They only had an issue when the Jews revolted against Rome. And that's why, as a punitive measure, they destroyed the Second Temple, the Romans, right? And only one wall stands, which is now called the Wailing Wall. It's also one of the walls of the Al-Aqsa mosque complex. Long story short. So the Romans were perfectly happy to allow the Jews to practice Judaism. They did not interfere in that. The Romans never interfered in Judaism. So then what was the deal with Christianity? You see, Judaism was an ancient religion. It predated Rome. And the religion posed no threat to the Roman Empire. This was not a proselytizing religion. The Jews did not seek to aggressively and actively convert people to Judaism. And the religion was not a political religion that sought to seek out and acquire and consolidate power, to do a regime change. That sort of thing wasn't there. Judaism was not that sort of religion. It was an old religion and the people practiced it, and they were not political in nature. The religion wasn't political in nature. So the Romans had no issue with Judaism whatsoever. When it comes to Christianity, this was a new artificial religion. Okay? And this was a political religion. The Christians sought to convert others to Christianity. They sought to expand their numbers. And they sought to grab power. This was a totally different beast. A completely new artificial cult that was expansionist. It did not simply seek to expand in terms of territory, it sought to expand its numbers by converting people. It sought to destroy the old religion, the Roman polytheistic religion. It portrayed the Roman polytheistic religion as evil, as satanic. The Christians were brutal towards polytheists. They were brutal towards polytheistic temples. They destroyed idols of Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. They desecrated temples. They killed priests. They killed mathematicians, women mathematicians. The Christians sought to overthrow Rome. And then the Christians portrayed themselves as the victims, martyrs. So that's why the Roman Empire sought to put an end to this. But as we know, it didn't work out. And eventually the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and made Christianity the official state religion, because if you can't beat them, join them. That's what happened. Amisha says, why don't we know with certainty how the Egyptian pyramids were built? Was none of this information passed down from generation to generation? So what are the pyramids we're talking about? The pyramids of Egypt. Pyramids of Egypt. So these are world famous structures. I think everyone knows what the pyramids are. The pyramids are situated right outside of Cairo, Al-Qaeda. And you have the three large pyramids of Giza, and then you have multiple smaller pyramids. And as you can see, here is an image of a human person in comparison with the blocks that make up the pyramids. As you can see, the blocks are gigantic. This is clearly an average sized human person here. Okay. The pyramids are gigantic. And these are some of the pyramids that we have: the pyramid of Khufu, the pyramid of Khafre, the Menkaure pyramid, the Red Pyramid, etc., etc., etc. So the pyramids are huge. You can't compare them with any existing structures, any existing buildings. Enormous, gigantic, ginormous, whatever word you want to call it. What about the pyramid of Menkaure? Let's say the pyramid of Menkaure. So this pyramid, as you can see, has a gigantic gaping hole in it. And the son of Salahuddin Ayyubi, his son, tried for 1 year to destroy the small pyramid. The pyramid of Menkaure is a reasonably small pyramid, as you can see. It's not huge. And the son of Salahuddin, who was ruling Egypt at the time, he tried for 1 year to press his entire military might into destroying this pyramid. All he could do was create this one little gash in the pyramid. That's all. Took him 1 year. His armed forces, his soldiers were hard at work for 1 year trying to destroy the pyramid. All they did was make that little incision in the pyramid. They were all they were trying to do is dislodge the blocks, those cubical blocks of stone, and drop them from the pyramid. That work took them 1 year to make that little incision in the pyramid. And then you have pyramids that are way bigger than the Menkaure pyramid. And how were they constructed is the question. Now, we kind of have possibly some understanding. It was not aliens, it was not UFOs, it was obviously done by human beings. Tens of thousands of slaves possibly worked on the pyramids. It would have taken possibly years or decades to build one pyramid. And they would have used ramps, clay ramps, to transport each individual stone block up the pyramid and place into position. How did they do it so precisely? Nobody has an idea. So these are works of monumental architecture, bigger than anything anyone has done. It would have taken incredible amounts of human labor, incredible precision, and decades of work to make one pyramid. And if you were to build a pyramid today using modern equipment, I'm not sure how it would be done. We don't have cranes that can lift blocks of stone that large. We don't have the means of, possibly we do, how to align everything so precisely. And it's It's kind of mind-boggling. We probably don't have any company or any organization today that can, if I give the money, okay, here's $25 billion, go and make a pyramid in the next 5 years. I don't think that they can do it even in the next 20 years. That's so hard. Quarrying the stuff. How do you quarry the rock and ensure each block of rock is exactly the right precise dimensions? You would need metal tools, probably copper tools to do that. The copper came from where the copper come from. What metal did they use? So big open questions remain. And in case some of the information was written down, it would have been written down on papyrus. Papyrus was the kind of parchment or whatever you want to call it. The papyrus is a reed that grows along the banks of the Nile, and that is converted into a sort of paper that was used in ancient Egypt. Now, papyrus is obviously fragile, delicate. It can't last centuries or thousands of years or millennia. That's why if records were kept, they would have crumbled into dust by now. And eventually, Egypt had a downfall. It was first conquered by the Persians for a while. Then it was conquered by the Greeks. It was ruled by the Greeks, and then it came under the rule of Islamic forces, and the entire population was converted to Islam. And today they don't even regard the pyramids as anything really important. Personally, from their perspective, it's important only because it brings in touristic revenue. So eventually, I think the records were lost. People stopped caring. People started seeing the pyramids as pre-Islamic pagan monuments that should be destroyed but could not be destroyed because they were too hard to destroy, and they were just tolerated until they became a source of touristic revenue. And that's why we don't know with certainty how the pyramids were built. Okay, let's talk about England. Nirvana Shanks has another question. Were there conflicts between the Angles and the Saxons after these ethnic groups settled in England, or did these ethnic groups fully integrate into a single political entity? So we're talking about England, the British Isles. The British Isles were under Roman occupation until roughly the 4th century AD. Eventually, the Western Roman Empire, which was ruled from Rome, it eventually declined. And the Romans eventually withdrew from England, from the British Islands, because it was too far away and they didn't have the money to administer it all. So they simply withdrew. And once the Romans withdrew, they withdrew sometime around the 4th or 5th century, around that time, the transition period between the two centuries, around the time the Romans withdrew. Let's quickly Google this. When did the Romans withdraw from Britain? Which year was it? Okay, AD 410, which is the beginning of the 5th century AD. And that created a power vacuum in what we now call Britain. Power vacuum. The imperial force is gone. The imperial power is gone. Rome is gone. So there's a power vacuum. So something has to fill the power vacuum. It was the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, these Germanic tribes, who filled the power vacuum. So the Saxons came from the region of Saxony in Germany. The Angles came from another part of Germany, and the Jews were also a Germanic tribe. So the Angles and the Saxons were the major population groups that invaded Britain and settled in Britain, and the Jutes also settled in the southern part of Britain. So if you look at the population of Britain at the time, it was mainly a Celtic population. The original inhabitants of Britain around the time of the Roman occupation were Celtic peoples, Pictish people, various Celtic ethnic groups and tribes. Then the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes come in, and then they fight. They defeat the Celtic peoples, and they establish various kingdoms in Britain. What did these kingdoms look like? Let's take a look. Okay, let's take a look at a map of Britain in, let's say, 8th century. Map of Britain in, let's say, 9th century. What did Britain look like in the 9th century AD? So now, if we look here, do we have something from Encyclopedia Britannica? Okay, so we have various kingdoms. Okay, as you can see on the map, there is Northumbria in the north. You have Mercia. You have East Anglia, Essex, Wessex, Sussex, Kent. Then you have Wales and Cumbria and so on. So the Angles, they set up the kingdom of East Anglia, possibly Kent. That's the Angles. And the Saxons, they set up Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, Sussex, etc. So the Wessex is Western Saxons, Essex is the Eastern Saxons, Sussex is the Southern Saxons. Was Northumbria, was it Saxon, or was Northumbria Saxon or Anglo? Yeah, there we go. It probably was not Anglo. Okay, fine. So the point I'm making is the Angles and Saxons, they settled down in different parts of Britain. Jutes were all the way down south. Essex, Sussex, Wessex were Saxon. Probably Northumbria, etc., and Mercia, etc., were settled by the Angles. But the deal is that the Angles and the Saxons did not fight each other. When these separate kingdoms were set up, it did not matter anymore whether these were Saxon kingdoms or Angle kingdoms. Even two Angle kingdoms would have differences, and they would fight each other at times. So it no longer mattered once they settled down and formed these kingdoms who was Angle and who was Saxon. Each kingdom was a rival of the other, and that was the deal. So there was no Angles versus Saxon kind of conflict, or Angles versus Saxons versus Jutes kind of conflict. It did not matter at all once the kingdoms were set up, and you had different kings who ruled these different kingdoms. The kings would look at each other king as a potential rival. Sometimes there were wars, sometimes there were alliances, as is always the case. Then you have the Viking Age. So at the time, Wales remained a separate entity, more Celtic. Welsh and the Scottish, etc., were a separate entity, and so on. Then you have the Viking Age. The Vikings start plundering, invading, raiding, plundering the east coast of the British Islands of Britain. And because of that, all these kingdoms have to unite in a sense and fight the Vikings. So that gave rise to an Anglo-Saxon identity, which was separate from the Viking identity, and eventually gave rise to an English identity, as opposed to Viking identity or Welsh or Scottish or Irish identity. So eventually the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, they merged over time into a single Anglo-Saxon or English identity and ethnicity. And then you had the Norman invasion in the year 1066 AD. So it's been a long period of upheaval in England. And eventually it all coalesces into one single ethnic identity. Somi says, what caused the Norman invasion of England in 1066 AD? Did Harold Godwinson actually break his oath? Or is the Bayeux Tapestry just Norman propaganda? First of all, what is the Bayeux Tapestry? Bayeux is a town in France, okay? Bayeux is a town in the northwestern part of France, Normandy. If we open the map, okay, it won't show us too much detail. Maybe it will. Let's zoom out. So here we have Bayeux is on the west coast of France, okay? And let us now do that. Yeah. So the Bayeux Tapestry is this Bayeux Tapestry now. Yeah, very famous, stunning 11th century embroidered linen, 70 meters long, that visually narrates the Norman conquest of England in 1066 AD, ending with the Battle of Hastings. And this is what it looks like. And is it propaganda? Well, a lot of it is propaganda, obviously. It is the Norman version of events, of what happened, the entire story. So who was Harold Godwinson? He was He was the king of England in the year 1066 AD. Now, what oath are we talking about and so on? That's a long story, right? So, Harold Godwinson's father, no, it was Edward the Confessor who was the king of England before Harold Godwinson. And Edward the Confessor died without leaving a male heir. Edward the Confessor was the son of Ethelred II. Ethelred II was king of England until he was ousted by the Vikings. King Canute who was Viking, he invaded England, kicked out King Ethelred II, and ruled England ruled what is now Britain for a few decades. And after Canute was king, his sons were kings of various parts of England. One was Arthur Canute, the other was Harold Harefoot. Harold Harefoot or something. Yeah, probably Harold Harefoot. So when Ethelred was sent into exile, his son Edward the Confessor was also in exile. And eventually, once the Viking age, you could say, ended, or once the Viking rule over England, once Canute is dead and his sons are no longer in power, either Arthur Canute or Harold Harefoot, that's when Edward the Confessor comes back to England, and the nobility of England, they elect him the king. The nobility of England who actually elected kings was called the Wighton or Witenagamot or something. Witenagamot. Yeah, Witenagemot. It was a supreme council in Anglo-Saxon England, assembly of wise men, high-ranking nobles, church leaders who advised the kings of laws and blah, 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 that sort of thing. So they elected Edward the Confessor as the king of England. So Edward the Confessor becomes the king. And Edward the Confessor, was in exile while the Vikings were ruling England. Edward the Confessor's mother was Norman. And that's why Edward was in Normandy. Okay, in exile. And while Edward the Confessor was in Normandy in exile, he allegedly made a promise to William of Normandy, William the Bastard as he was then known. So allegedly Edward made a promise to William, the Duke of Normandy, that he will give William the crown of England. And later Harold Godwinson was also in exile in Normandy for a few years. And it is alleged that he also had made a promise on some holy sacred relics that he would make William, the Duke of Normandy, the next king of England. So Edward becomes king of England and William does nothing. But Edward dies without a male heir. So the Witenagemot once again comes together and they appoint Harold Godwinson as the king of England in the year 1066 AD. Now William of Normandy says that this is all wrong because Harold has promised me the crown of England. But the point is that Harold did not have the right or the authority to give the crown to somebody. He was elected the king by the Wighton, and as such he had to serve his kingdom. He did not have the authority to give the crown to somebody else, but whatever. So William of Normandy, the Duke of Normandy, he got the pretext for a war, and he also somehow secured the support of the Vatican. So he then had assembled a big navy which could cross the English Channel, and he crossed the English Channel in 1066 AD. And then there's this war. Harold Godwinson, my goodness, what a guy he was. So in the year 1066 AD, Harold Godwinson has just been appointed the King of England a while ago. And he gets news that in the north part of England, there's this huge Viking invasion force that has landed. And who is leading the Vikings? It is King Harald Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson, the brother of Harold Godwinson, traitor. So Harold goes all the way north to fight Tostig, his brother Tostig, and King Harald Hardrada. He defeats them, kills them both. It is what it is. It's a brutal battle. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, 1066 AD. The battle is just over. His army is beaten, bruised, but they're victorious. And he gets the news that William of Normandy has landed in South England, around Hastings. So then he has to go all the way from the north of England, march his army all the way south, his beaten, bruised army. And then then his army meets William of Normandy in Hastings. And because of bad luck or whatever, Harold is killed by an arrow to his eye, and William becomes victorious. And he goes from being called William the Bastard to being called William the Conqueror. So that is the story of the Norman invasion of England in 1066 AD. Somi says, can you tell the story of Henry II? How did Henry's knights accidentally interpret his words and kill Thomas Becket? Henry II, interesting person. What was the words? Will nobody rid me of this meddlesome priest? That's what he had said. So who was Henry II? So like I said, there was an invasion of England by the Normans, by William of Normandy in the year 1066 AD. William the Conqueror. He had multiple sons. His last son, the youngest son, the eighthling, was Henry Beauclerc. And he was known as Henry I. He became the king of England after the death of William Rufus, his older brother, who died in the New Forest. Hunting accident. Convenient. So Henry I becomes the king of England. And he had a crown prince who died in the sinking of the white ship, which was crossing the English Channel, because of which his daughter, Matilda, became his heir, and she became the Empress of England. So Matilda's son was Henry II. Henry II was the grandson of Henry I and the great-grandson of William the Conqueror. So Henry II was born in what is now France, okay? His father was Geoffrey of Anjou, and his mother was Empress Matilda, daughter of Henry I. So Henry II was the Duke of Normandy, and he was a great conqueror. Okay, he married Eleanor of Aquitaine, and because of which Aquitaine was a part of France and Spain and so on. And he waged many wars and conquests, and he expanded his kingdom in France. Then he became the king of England also, because his grandfather was the king of England, and so he succeeded the current king of England as the king of England. And then he fought multiple campaigns in Scotland, in Ireland, also in France, in Wales also, and he expanded his kingdom significantly, his empire, you could say. So he became a major ruler in Western Europe. And he had, I don't know how many children, 7, 8 children, multiple sons. And all, when you have this army of entitled children who are all descendants of William the Conqueror and all sons of the king, they all want power. And eventually there was a rebellion. His sons rebelled. One of his sons was, who were his sons? There was King John, the younger John. There was Edward, was it? There was Richard, who eventually was known as Richard the Lionheart, and so on. Multiple sons. So there were 2 rebellions by his sons that he had to put down. Okay, repeated quarrels with his sons, especially Richard the Lionheart, and all that stuff. Right? He was even eventually defeated by his son Richard, and that eventually led to the death of Henry II. But what about this person, Thomas Becket? So Henry II was a friend of Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket was a churchman. He was a priest. Okay, so Henry II appointed Thomas Becket as his royal chancellor in the 12th century AD, and Becket was a close friend, close companion of the king, and he was very good at serving the royal interests of the king. And because of that, the king was very pleased with Thomas Becket. And then the king, Henry II, appointed Thomas Becket as the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is a very major church title in England. Okay. So Thomas Becket was appointed by Henry as the Archbishop of Canterbury. But after this happened, Thomas Becket he kind of changed his tune. And he started placing the interests of the church above the interests of the crown. And that became a problem. He is now the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most high-ranking church official in England, and he's going up against the king. He's putting the interest of the church and the principles of the church above what the king wants. He wants to control the clergy. He wants to control, so that makes him very powerful, right? And because of that, Henry sent Thomas Becket into exile, out of the country. And eventually there was some kind of reconciliation between Becket and the king, and he came back. But very quickly the disputes once again flared up between the two of them, right? And because of this, Henry II was super frustrated with Thomas Becket. It is said that one day in his court, he just said this aloud to nobody in particular. He said, "Will nobody rid me of this meddlesome priest? Will nobody rid me of this meddlesome priest?" So he did not say this to one person specifically. He just said this aloud. And 4 of his knights, they heard these angry words, and they interpreted these angry words as a command to act. And they went to Canterbury, and they assassinated Thomas Becket in the altar of the cathedral or whatever it is over there. And that was the deal. That is how the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, was assassinated by 4 knights of Henry II, who interpreted Henry's words as the command to assassinate Thomas Becket. So those words are very famous today. Will no one rid me of this troublesome, meddlesome, turbulent priest? So by saying these words to nobody in particular, and by framing what he said as a question, Henry II established plausible deniability for any guilt. Because see, his words led to the assassination of the Archbishop of Canterbury. But he can say that, you know what, I just asked a question. I did not issue an order to somebody. I did not say this to anybody in particular. I just said this aloud out of frustration. Will nobody rid me of this troublesome, meddlesome priest? Right? So that's the story of Henry II and the assassination of Thomas Becket. Swami says, what was the Magna Carta? Why did the English crown accept such an arrangement? Was it just something that was for namesake, or did the king really lose absolute power after the Magna Carta? What was the Magna Carta? So we spoke about Henry II, right? The great king of England, the great Angevin king, of Normandy as also. His son, his successor after Richard I was John, King John of England. Now, Richard the Lionheart, was this very vigorous warrior king who was more interested in fighting than ruling. So he spent his whole life fighting, and eventually he got killed out of sheer stupidity or carelessness. There was no need for him to get killed the way he got killed, but that's a different story. So Richard the Lionheart is dead, and then John comes to power. His younger brothers, John, the son of Henry II. So John was a weak king, and he issued this royal charter called the Magna Carta. Okay, this royal charter, the Magna Carta, it listed the king's powers, and by listing the powers of the king, it limited the king's powers. And the Magna Carta also enshrined, affirmed certain customs, certain liberties, certain privileges of the church, and also of the king's minions, the king's barons. So it essentially was a written agreement between King John and his barons who had rebelled against him. See, King John, the son of Henry II, Henry II was a great king. His son, King John, was a weak king. And he was not a good king. He was not a good administrator. I mean, you can be a good administrator even if you're not a great conqueror, right? But he was not that. His rule was unpopular, widely unpopular. His taxation was heavy. The kind of justice that he imparted was very arbitrary. He was a military failure. He lost most of his father's French territories, French lands. His finances were ruined. His prestige was down the drain, essentially. So that is King John. And because he was a weak king, his minions. See, every king has nobles and barons and all who serve him, who have their own armies that are to be provided to the king on demand, on demand whenever required. That sort of thing. That was the structure, the feudal structure, the structure of that part, England and Europe of the time. So a group of his barons, most powerful barons, they rebelled against him with the backing of the church. They organized a rebellion against King John. And in the year 1215, they captured and occupied London, which obviously, if you capture the capital of England, of Britain, it gives you a tremendous amount of leverage. It gave them a very strong bargaining position. And once this happened, the capture and occupation of London, it essentially meant civil war. Civil war became a real immediate threat, a real clear and present danger for King John. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, obviously Thomas Becket is dead by now, so whoever was next, or whoever was the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, he said, I'll be a mediator. And what he did was he supported the barons. In what way? He took the barons' list of demands, okay, and he converted that into a formal text, a formal charter text that could serve as a peace agreement, a peace settlement. And this is something that King John had to sign. Otherwise, there would be civil war and he would be defeated. So this came to be known as the Great Charter, or the Magna Carta in Latin. And this document, essentially, in this document, the King of England promises all kinds of rights and privileges, the protection of church rights, various church rights, protections from unlawful imprisonment to his minions, to his barons, technically his minions, right? He promises reasonably swift justice. The charter limited various kinds of taxes. What is the maximum kind of tax the crown can impose? And it also limited the amount of payments that the barons had to make to the crown, to the King of England. So this listed down exactly what are the powers that the king has, and by doing that, it curtailed his powers. Okay, it curtailed his powers, and so this is where historians will tell you that this is where you have a properly codified, the beginning of properly codified rule of law in England. But who benefited from this? Did the people of England benefit from this? They did not. Around this time, 90%, 95% of the people were either peasants or slaves. It's only 5% which were the king and his knights and barons and the military people and the church people. Everybody else was oppressed. Everybody was peasants or landless serfs or slaves. Did the 95% of the population, did they benefit? Did they gain anything from the Magna Carta? Nothing whatsoever. So who gained? Who benefited from this? It was the barons and the church that benefited. So the rule of law was for them. No arbitrary injustice and arbitrary justice and all, that was for them, not for the common people. They continued to be oppressed for the longest time. Now they are free, I suppose. So that's the deal about the Magna Carta, okay? John Goodman says, you claimed that the white Huns, the Shweta Hunas, destroyed the Taxila. What is Taxila? What is a Taxila? Are you talking about the Takshashila University? It is not Taxila, it is Takshashila. I refuse to use the barbaric contraction Taxila. It is Takshashila. So I claim the white Huns, the Shweta Hunas, destroyed the Takshashila, But there is quite strong evidence to suggest that it was actually Alexander III of Macedon who did so. What are your views on that? Okay. Look, we don't have Indian records of the time of Alexander's invasion of the western fringes of India. We don't have any Indian records that survive from the time. But we do have Greek records of Alexander's alleged, you know, invasion and rule or some parts of Western India. So, according to Greek records, according to Greek historians, chronicles from a couple of centuries after Alexander, there was a king who ruled in Takshashila at the time. His name was King Ambhi. The Greeks called him Taxiles. And he was apparently a rival of King Porus, Purushottam, or whatever his name was. And the Greeks claim that the king of Taxila, King Ambhi, voluntarily surrendered to Alexander. He gave all his silver and his wealth and his territory to Alexander. Sir, you are so great, please take it all. Alexander was very pleased with him. And he said, you keep the wealth. You keep your kingdom, but you serve me. So you are now my vassal. So that's what the Greek records say, that the king of Takshashila, King Ambhi, or Taxiles, voluntarily surrendered to Alexander, and Alexander allowed him to keep his wealth and his territory. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say about this. King, not Ambhi, King Ambhi. You see, Wikipedia calls him Taxiles. Taxiles or Taxilas was the Greek chronicler's name for the ruler who reigned over the tract between the Sindhu and the Jhelum rivers in the Punjab region at the time of Alexander's expedition. His name was Ambhi. The Greeks appear to have called him Taxiles or whatever, after the name of his capital city of Takshila, near Attock, Pakistan. So that's what the thing claims. And so apparently Ambhi sent an embassy to Alexander with presents of a lot of silver and oxen and sheep. And he was on hostile terms with his neighbor Porus. And so he surrendered to Alexander. Alexander returned Ambhi's title and all that, and so on. So clearly, according to the Greek records, Ambhi surrendered to Alexander, and Alexander did not destroy Takshashila, did not kill Ambhi. He returned the kingdom to Ambhi. He said, you keep the kingdom, keep your wealth, you be my vassal, and that's all I need from you. And the Greek records even claim that Alexander went to the university and interacted with gymnosophists or whatever that is, which is obviously Indian intellectuals from the university, and he was very impressed with them and so on. So according to Greek records, Alexander does not do any damage to the University of Takshashila. Indian records are silent about Alexander completely silent about him. And later the region comes under various regimes. Sometimes the region was temporarily under Persian rule. Most of the time it was under Indian rule. Then for some time it came under Indo-Greek rule. Then it came under Scythian rule. Then it came under Kushan rule. And eventually it was overrun by the Shweta Hunas. And they destroyed Takshashila. One of their ignorant kings destroyed Takshashila. Was it Mihirkul? Possibly Mihirkul. Possibly. Yeah, so that's what actually the records tell us. Right. Rahul Dunake says, when did the concept of high-rise buildings come to existence? High-rise buildings. So, tall buildings, one great example of really tall buildings from antiquity is the pyramids of Egypt. Very tall, very tall, very tall. But those aren't high-rise buildings. These are not buildings for human habitation. The pyramids, their purpose is still unknown, what purpose they actually served. So they were not buildings, they were monuments. Which is the oldest known recorded high-rise building? Possibly the Kanishka Stupa. Let's Google that. How tall was that? So that's about from roughly 1900 years ago. It is now lost. The Pakistanis have destroyed it. Okay, so outskirts of Peshawar. What does Wikipedia say about this? As always, Wikipedia is not a reliable source of information necessarily for Indian topics, but whatever. Let's just look at this. So this is what remained of the Kanishka Stupa about a century and a half ago. Shahji Ka Dhera, outskirts of Peshawar, and now apparently there are slums on top of it. So how tall was this structure? Was this building? Meters. Let's see, meters or feet or whatever. Okay, height was about 120 meters to 170 meters, which is pretty big. So 400 feet to 560 feet. That is how tall the Kanishka Stupa was. It was built about roughly 18 or 1900 years before today. Huge building, huge. The tallest building in the known world possibly at the time. That's one of the high-rise buildings from ancient times. But that, once again, it was a temple or a stupa. It was a religious structure. It was not a building where people lived. During the Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history, we had multi-storied buildings in the metropolitan areas like Kalibangan and Rakhigadi and Harappa and Mohenjo-daro and so on. We had multi-storied buildings, but not high-rise buildings. So the Kanishka Stupa was not a building that was intended for human habitation. It was not used for that. When did we first have high? You had something called the Manhattan of the Desert in Yemen, right? What was the Manhattan of the Desert? The desert. Yemen. I forget the name of the... Shibam. Shibam in Yemen's Hadramaut region. Shibam. So if you look at Shibam, so first of all, how old is it? It was founded in the 3rd century AD. And so if you look at this city, ancient city, you will see kind of high-rise buildings, multi-storied buildings like 7, 8 stories high. And this was built several centuries ago. So does it tell us when these tall buildings were first constructed? I'm not sure what it says. So it's been in existence for about 1700 years. Shibam. So that's an example of high-rise buildings. So multi-storied buildings were in existence 5,000-6,000 years ago in India. The Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history, we had the Kanishka Stupa that was built about 18 or 1900 years ago, which was a gigantic building. You had the Shibam, city of Shibam in Yemen, where you have possibly 1,000-year-old multi-storied buildings, reasonably high-rise buildings, maybe 700-800 years old, that sort of thing. So eventually, this happened obviously over time, gradually, and the proper high-rise buildings or skyscrapers, those were constructed in the United States in the 19th century. So you had Otis, the engineer who invented the elevator, which is also called a lift. And that made it possible for humans to build really tall buildings, and you could just go into the elevator and go to whichever floor you wanted. You didn't have to climb all the way up. And so that was a transformative invention, the elevator. And that opened up architecture to creating really tall structures, tall buildings. And that was the beginning of the era of skyscrapers in North America. So that's where the proper skyscrapers, really high-rise buildings, come into existence. But yeah, tall buildings have been around for centuries, maybe even millennia. Right. What next? What question do we have next? Amisha says, the current theory is that the Indo-European language was spread by a steppe nomad culture. Yeah, that's the Aryan invasion, migration, tourism, picnic model, isn't it? That's the current theory, the mainstream theory. So apparently, as per this mainstream, the currently accepted mainstream consensus, the Indo-European language was spread by a steppe nomadic culture. How were there so many people living in the steppes during the Neolithic period, right? First of all, what is the Neolithic period? The Neolithic period is a new Stone Age, roughly 10,000 years, roughly 10,000 BC to about 2000 BC, roughly. Okay, I'm sure other people will have different interpretations, but you could say it's 10,000 BC to about 2000 BC. That is the Neolithic period, the new Stone Age, and it is said that this is the time where our ancestors shifted from being nomadic hunter-gatherers to becoming agriculturalists. And because they became agriculturalists, they had to settle down. They had to start domesticating animals. They had to set up permanent settlements and villages and towns and cities eventually. And they developed new technologies like polished stone tools and pottery and weaving, eventually metallurgy. And this is the time when you have the dawn of civilization. That is the Neolithic period. Okay. So the theory is that the Indo-European language was spread during this period by steppe nomads. So what is the steppe? We know what nomadic people are, people who move from one place to another. They never stay in one place for too long. But what is the steppe? The steppe is the Eurasian steppe. This vast region from, you could say, the Xinjiang part of present-day China. It encompasses the entirety of Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan mainly Kazakhstan, and it also includes Eastern Europe, which is Ukraine, southern Russia, etc. And it also includes parts of Siberia, and it also encompasses Mongolia, actually. Okay, so that is the Eurasian steppe, huge region, 8 to 10,000 kilometers wide. That's the region we're talking about. Okay, so that is the Eurasian steppe. Now, what were the populations like in the known world outside of Africa? At the time, no one knew about, no one from our perspective, our ancestors' perspective, nobody knew about Australia or the Americas. What were the populations like in Eurasia at this time? So the total population of the world was of Eurasia during the Neolithic until about 2000 BC was about maximum 20 million. So the Indian subcontinent you may have had maybe 8 million people that lived in the Indian subcontinent. When it comes to China, you might have had another 8 million people who lived in China. So there you have 16 million right away. Then west of the Indian subcontinent, you have the Persian plateau region, maybe 500,000, maybe 1 million people there. Then you have Anatolia, okay, maybe 500,000 people in Anatolia. If you take the whole of Europe, maybe a couple of million people, maximum 5 million, okay. The Eurasian steppe, this gigantic, vast region that we spoke about just now, maybe 500,000 people, maximum, probably 200,000 people, maybe 300,000 people. So the Eurasian steppe had people, but the population densities were incredibly low at the time. And you put all of these population groups together, India, China, Eurasia, Anatolia, Persia, Europe, all of this together, you may have maximum 20 million people, possibly less than that. So the steppe region had a tremendously low population density. And unlike India or China, where you had settled populations and proper civilizations, maybe 5,000 years ago, unlike India and China, or even Persia, in the steppe region, you had hunter-gatherers, you had nomads, maybe early agriculturalists. So despite there being settled populations and civilized populations in India, in China, even Persia, Anatolia, etc., in the steppe regions, you still had nomadic hunter-gatherers who lived there. So the populations weren't high. The population over the steppe wasn't high at all. 500,000 maybe. Some people may say 1 million. But if you look at the actual area it encompasses, the population density is still incredibly low. So that was the situation. And then how how does a nomadic steppe culture give rise to a high civilization like India? Makes no sense. The culture of of nomadic hunter-gatherers. It gives rise to the high civilization of India. How does it make sense? It makes sense apparently to some people. Okay. Okay, we still have a lot of more questions I can take, but I'm out of time. We have crossed 2 hours. So maybe I will take some questions from the live chat. Okay, there are some super chats. Let me take those. Okay, first of all, we have Div Kali, who is a new member. Welcome to the membership. Thank you very much for becoming a member. I really appreciate that. Thank you. WBR says, did the US really send its aircraft carriers towards India in 1971, since there's no mention of it in Western literature and media? My opinion, recent statement about Russia by Russia ambassador to Bangladesh. Okay, we'll not discuss geopolitics. I'll discuss history. Did the US really send aircraft carriers? It sent one aircraft carrier strike group, the USS Enterprise. There's no mention of it in literature, in media. Really? How did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion? Okay, 1971 USS Enterprise, Bay of Bengal. There's no mention, really? It's all over the place. It's all over the place, all over media. I'm sure there are books about this. Books. The Fall of Dhaka, Stories of Grit and Glory, I don't know. Books of Force Without War by Blickman and Kaplan. The Indian End of the Telescope by G. Hiranandani. The Taunton Confrontation by R.L. So there's plenty of books, there's plenty of academic papers. The Americans sent an aircraft carrier strike group led by the USS Enterprise, an aircraft carrier, which had a bunch of other destroyers around it and maybe submarines as well. The British also sent an aircraft carrier strike group into the Bay of Bengal. So there was one American strike group, there was a British strike group. There were two aircraft carrier strike groups sent to intimidate India. It's a fact, everyone knows it. So there you have it. Brown Leprechaun says, could you please discuss the Muslim Brotherhood and its history? Well, that's something I haven't really gone into in great depth. Did it emerge out of Egypt? It did entrench itself in Egypt. The Al-Azhar University kind of in Cairo is kind of its ideological home ground, possibly. No, I'm not very clear about the exact history of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not something I've studied in great detail. It's definitely something interesting. And maybe I should study this and go into the bottom of this. But at this point in time, I will not be able to give you a proper history of the Muslim Brotherhood. Sorry about that. I can't know everything. It's not possible for one person to know everything. So I have not really looked into this specific matter. It's definitely an important aspect of history and the present day world also. But yeah, not right now. I can't. Sorry. Rush God is a new member. Thank you very much for becoming a member. Let us all welcome Rush God to the membership of the channel. Thank you very much indeed. UMXG lol haha says breast ripper was used by Francis Xavier. These clamps were heated to rip the breast of Hindu women who refused to convert. Today, these Hindus go to the same Saint Francis Xavier Church for sightseeing and prayers. It's because it's true. It's true. Let's Google this since you're mentioning it, right? Goa Inquisition breast ripper. The breast ripper. This hideous instrument. I mean, imagine how evil the people are who used such instruments on helpless people, right? Breast stripper used by missionaries led by Francis Xavier in Goa. These iron clamps were heated to red hot temperatures and used to rip the breasts from Hindu women who opposed conversion. If the woman didn't die, she would be horribly disfigured. I mean, that's the kind of barbarity we have endured, or our ancestors and our people have endured. And today, our people go to these churches for sightseeing and prayers. Look, I don't blame the people. We don't teach this history to our kids in school, in college, university. None of this is taught. We are taught a whitewashed, sanitized version of history in which the foreign oppressors are our saviors. That's the fault of the education system that the government refuses to reform. Maybe some small changes have happened recently, but nothing significant, nothing major. So yes, you are absolutely entirely correct. This is just one example of the brutality, of the barbarity that was unleashed on the people of India by these monsters. Yeah. UMXG lol haha says, I hoped you had a very Merry Christmas and you prayed at the St. Francis Xavier Church. You see, this year I was so unfortunate that I completely forgot there was this festival called Christmas, and I completely forgot to pray at the St. Francis Xavier Church, which I have never done before. Maybe next year I may consider doing some kind of excursion, possibly. Yeah, so okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, that brings me to the end, I suppose, of today's live stream. All the super chats are done. And now we can discuss anything we want, apparently. Hair care routine. What's my hair care routine? Okay, editor, please don't take any of these questions. These don't matter. What's my haircut? Just wash your hair. Yeah, every other day, maybe 3 times a week. That's enough. No other hair care routine. Okay. See, what else do we have? Abhinav says everyone intuitively knows Nazism is objectively evil. This intuition already assumes objective moral law. This is objective, but you are saying objective on subjective level. I'm not sure what you're saying, sir. I'm not sure what you're saying. You are too intelligent for me, sir. My brain can't wrap itself around that. Okay, anyway, so I think we can now can we take more questions? Maybe for some time, perhaps. Ayush Singh says, was non-violence in India's freedom struggle a British encouraged diversion to prevent an American-style armed revolution? Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Nehru became faces of those diversions, question mark. Look, who founded the political party that was at the forefront of the non-violent resistance? Who found the Indian National Congress? Yeah, who founded the Indian National Congress? The Indian National Congress was founded by Alan Octavian Hume, a retired British civil servant. He is referred to as the father of the Indian National Congress. Alan Octavian Hume, the Great Hedge of India. Have you heard of the Great Hedge of India? Does it say anything about the Hedge of India over here? The Indian Inland Customs Line. This guy, Alan Octavian Hume, he implemented this inland customs line that caused the deaths of millions. You can look into the details. And he founded the Indian National Congress, which was at the forefront of the non-violent resistance against the British. Imagine if there was a political party that was all about violent resistance, armed resistance. It would have given rise to an American-style armed revolution. So I think you can all come to your own conclusions based on that. Yes. Okay. Om Bekirikar says, where did the haplogroup R2 originate? Why is it mainly found in India? I think R itself originates in India. Downstream of R, you have R1, R2. Then downstream of that, you have R1A, R1B, R2, or whatever, that sort of thing. So the parent haplogroup is R. And the parent haplogroup of R, what is the parent haplogroup of R? Eventually, you will come to haplogroup F, which is upstream of R. And F itself originates in India. So, what does Wikipedia say about haplogroup R2? Let's see. Haplogroup R2. Yeah, it's found in so-called South Asia. What does Wikipedia say about this? Place of origin, obviously, South Asia or Central Asia. And what is upstream of R2 is R. What's the place of origin? North Asia, really. It's the Indian subcontinent. Ancestor is P M something. Ancestor is P. Where is P? Once again, Indian subcontinent. What's its ancestor? K2B, was it? Before that, you have K2. Before that, you have K. What is before K? IJK. Before IJK, you have HIJK, GHIJK, and above that, you have F. And F, as you can see, where it originates. So, look, eventually the truth will come out. The ancestry is in India. Right. Okay. So this is why I prefer to take live stream questions from the super chat so that I don't have to think which one to pick. There are so many going on here. If I have super chats, I'll just pick the super chats without pick them all. That's it. What do we have? Why no videos on the Bangladesh issue? Do I have to? Which Bangladesh issue? The Hindu-Muslim thing that's going on. Look, man, look, people, I can't make videos about everything. I look into history, geopolitics, science. The Bangladesh issue is not a historical issue. It's not a scientific issue. In geopolitics, it is an issue. It's not a major issue. So let the various popular YouTubers make those videos. I don't have to talk about everything. You ask me questions about this during a live stream, I will certainly take up the question. But I'm not making a separate video about this. Okay. Okay, I suppose I can end the live stream now. So these questions I've answered so many times. So many times I've answered these questions. Of course, I understand that many of you are new viewers, so I totally get it. So let me answer this question. Why did we have to face millennia of humiliation? So we did not face multiple millennia of humiliation. We faced one millennium of humiliation. The Chinese like to speak about their century of humiliation when they were oppressed by the West. We in India were oppressed by first the Turks and then by the Europeans, total for 1,000 years. So that's a millennium of humiliation. How did this happen? It happened because we eventually got conquered by foreigners, barbarians. How do you get conquered and why do you get conquered? You get conquered by foreigners if you are weak. When you have a region as large as a subcontinent, you need political unity and stability. If you have political unity and stability, nobody can conquer you. So we had periods of time when you had the Mauryan Empire, the Shunga Empire, the Kushan Empire, the Gupta Empire, the Chola Empire, the Maratha Empire, and so on. Periods of time when the whole subcontinent was essentially united under a single political center. During such periods of time, nobody can even think of invading and defeating you. But when you are fragmented, what happens is that you have multiple kingdoms who are all adversaries of each other. That's when foreigners can come and take advantage of that and conquer you. And that's what happened. So we were invaded by the Turks when we were in a period of fragmentation, and that's why the situation went downhill from there onwards. That's the reason why we had to face a millennium of humiliation, which is still not over, by the way. We are still colonized. So, okay. What else do we have? Okay, I'll just take one more question. Ankita Kachab, good to see you, ma'am. A question by Moonlight Sonata 123. My thoughts on the US Manta project. What's a Manta project? I know about the Manhattan project. What is the Manta project? Let's Google it. I'm not sure. I unfortunately will not know about every project. What is the US Manta project? US Manta project. Manta Ray project or Manta project? Manta Ray. Manta Ray project? Or is it a Manta project? The question is US Manta project. What is that? US Manta project is DARPA's Manta Ray uncrewed underwater vehicle, a large autonomous long duration submersible designed for deep sea missions, capable of carrying payloads like mines and torpedoes or harvesting energy from the ocean. Extra large uncrewed underwater vehicle, and so on. So this is the weaponization of robotics, of AI. Yeah, that's what it is. So this can do very nice things, but it also can do military activities. So yeah, that's what it is. We are now entering an era. We're going to see the synthesis of artificial intelligence with robotics. And you're going to have autonomous vehicles that can operate independent of human control, or with human control plus AI inputs, hybrid form. And they can potentially operate autonomously for days or weeks on end without the need for human intervention. And such vehicles, if deployed in swarms of thousands, can give you essentially hegemony over the oceans. So yeah, interesting that this is happening, and no surprise. So every nation that has an industrial base and reasonable amount of brains, they should invest in these technologies now. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. Okay, UMX says video on more myths Indians believe in when. Oh, I'll see about that. Is it a pressing issue right now? I already have one video about the major myths that Indians believe in. I'll see about that. I'll see. The major myths, I think I've covered them, right? We'll see. Maybe. Okay, so that brings me to the end of today's live stream. Thank you very much, everybody. Almost 2.5 hours. Really appreciate the questions. Really enjoy the questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for asking questions. And tomorrow, we're going to have another live stream, which is going to be an Ask Me Anything, any topic whatsoever based on the super chat. That way I can just don't have to look for questions. I can just pick all the questions. That's it. So I look forward to seeing you there tomorrow. I'll take as many questions as possible over maybe 2-3 hours. And please ask me whatever it is that you're interested in. I look forward to that. I look forward to seeing you there tomorrow. Until then, take care. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. Keep raising your standards. See you all tomorrow, 8 p.m. India time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.